My sister-in-law asked to borrow my car for an hour. She came back 3 hours later with a dent and a receipt that accidentally fell out of her bag. I picked it up. I read the address. And after that, I never looked at my husband the same way again. The moment Bonnie's car door slammed shut and she pressed the keys into my palm, I felt that strange knot in my stomach that had been tightening for the last 3 hours. It was a heavy, cold sensation, the kind that settles deep in your gut when you know the world has shifted beneath your feet, even if you haven't seen the cracks yet. She had asked to take my old Ford Fusion just to run over to the Walmart in Dayton for an hour, or so she'd claimed, but 3 hours had ticked by on the kitchen clock while I sat in the window, watching the humid Ohio afternoon fade into a hazy, unsettled evening. Now that she was back, she had that specific brand of twitchy, frantic nervousness on her face. The kind she always wore when she was failing miserably at hiding a lie. She dropped the keys into my hand, her eyes darting toward the gravel driveway rather than meeting mine, and she started yanking the zipper of her oversized canvas bag shut with a desperate, jerky energy. I noticed her fingers were trembling, her skin pale against the brass teeth of the zipper. "Faith, I'm so sorry I'm late," she muttered, her voice sounding thin and breathless like she'd been running. The construction on the bypass was just a nightmare. Absolute gridlock all the way back from the county line. She didn't wait for me to respond. She didn't even look at the car she'd just vacated. She just turned on her heel and practically jogged across the narrow street to her own small, weathered house. I stood there on the cracked pavement, the metal of the keys biting into my skin. The sun was hanging low, making the silver body of the Fusion glint, but as I walked around toward the front bumper, the air seemed to leave my lungs in one sharp whistle. Right there, tucked under the left headlight, was a deep, jagged dent. The silver paint was gouged out, curled back like a fresh wound, revealing the dark, ugly plastic underneath. This wasn't just a parking lot scrape from a stray shopping cart. This was a hit. A real impact with something solid. My heart started hammering against my ribs because I knew exactly what this meant for us. Between Silas's unemployment and the rising cost of everything at the local diner where I pulled double shifts, our budget was a thin piece of glass already under too much pressure. Silas had been out of work for 6 months since the mill closed, and we were already 3 weeks behind on the rent for this drafty little place. A repair bill and the inevitable spike in my insurance premiums would be the final blow. We'd be underwater and there'd be no coming up for air. I turned, my mouth opening to call out to Bonnie, to demand she come back and explain why she thought she could just dump a wrecked car on me and run. But then something caught my eye on the ground. A small, white scrap of paper had fallen from her bag when she was fumbling with that zipper. The breeze caught it, tumbling it across the concrete until it got stuck against the tread of the front tire. I leaned down and picked it up. It wasn't a Walmart receipt. It wasn't for groceries or household supplies. It was a parking stub from a private professional plaza in the high-rent district across town. A part of the city where Bonnie had absolutely no business being. Right below the address, someone had scribbled a room number in sharp, blue ink. 402. I looked at the time stamp on the bottom. It was from exactly 90 minutes ago. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Bonnie hadn't gone to Walmart. She had driven my car to a professional building full of private offices while I sat at home worrying about her. I crumpled the receipt in my fist, the sharp edges of the thermal paper digging into my palm, and I climbed into the driver's seat. The interior of the car still smelled faintly of Silas's tobacco, that sweet, heavy scent he'd carried since we were teenagers. One of his old work gloves was sitting on the passenger seat, the leather worn and stained with the grease of a life spent fixing things that were now broken beyond repair. For the last 2 weeks, Silas had been telling me he was scouting for work over in the next county, heading out toward the Tennessee border. He'd leave early every morning looking tired and grim and come back late at night claiming he'd been pounding the pavement at every warehouse and loading dock he could find. I'd believed him. I'd wanted to believe him. I'd spent my nights worrying about his pride, trying to keep the house quiet and the coffee hot. But this receipt was a seed of poison and it was blooming fast. Bonnie was Silas's sister, my sister-in-law, but more than that, she was his shadow. They had always been thick as thieves, whispering in corners at family funerals, sharing secrets that usually ended with me being the last one to know anything of importance. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine gave a strained, wheezing groan, a sound that mirrored the exhaustion deep in my own marrow. I backed out of the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a ghostly, bloodless white. I didn't think, I just drove. I followed the address on that crumpled slip of paper, heading toward the heart of the city with a cold, focused fire burning in my chest. As I drove, memories started flickering through my mind like a bad film strip. I thought about the phone calls Silas would take in the backyard, pacing near the fence. I thought about the way Bonnie would get that pitying, shifty look in her eyes whenever I mentioned how stressed I was about the mounting bills. "Faith, honey, you worry too much," she'd say, patting my hand with a fake sugar-sweet smile. "Silas is just under a lot of pressure. Men handle things differently. Just give him some space." Space. I'd given him miles of space, and apparently he'd used it to build a fortress of lies right in front of my face. I realized then with a sickening jolt that I hadn't just been supportive. I had been a fool. I had been the perfect, quiet, working-class wife who didn't ask the hard questions because she was too terrified of the answers. When I finally pulled up to the address, my whole body was vibrating with a sharp, electric rage. It was a nondescript brick building, the kind with tinted windows and a directory in the lobby that smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. I parked the car in a far corner of the lot, staring at that dent in the bumper one last time before I got out. It looked like a permanent scar now. The lobby was empty, the air conditioning humming a low, mournful tune that set my teeth on edge. I didn't bother with the elevator. I took the stairs, my boots clattering against the concrete steps as I climbed to the 4th floor, my breath hitching in my chest. Room 402 wasn't a doctor's office. It wasn't a clinic. The gold lettering on the frosted glass door read, "Caldwell and Associates, Family and Estate Law." I stopped dead in my tracks. My feet felt like they'd been bolted to the linoleum floor. Family law? Was this a divorce? Had Silas been planning to jump ship while I was busy trying to figure out how to keep the lights on? I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady the roar of blood in my ears, and reached for the handle. The door wasn't shut tight. It clicked open under the weight of my hand. There was a small, unoccupied reception area, but voices were drifting through the half-open door of the inner office. They were voices I would know in a crowded stadium. It was Silas. And Bonnie was right there with him. Silas's voice was loud, laced with that jagged, defensive anger he used whenever he felt cornered or caught. "Why the hell did you take Faith's car? I told you to use yours. What if she notices the damage?" Then came Bonnie, her voice muffled, sounding like she was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. "I was scared, Silas. I hit a concrete pylon in the parking garage," I panicked. "But it doesn't matter now. The papers are signed. The notary is finished. There's no going back. We have the money coming to us now." My hand tightened on the brass doorframe until the metal dug into my palm. The papers. The money. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open and stepped into the room like a storm. The two of them jumped like they'd been hit by a bolt of lightning. Silas's face went from a flushed, angry red to a sickly, chalky white in a matter of seconds. Bonnie let out a small, strangled gasp and immediately began swiping at her eyes. Across the desk sat a man in a sharp, expensive suit, presumably Mr. Caldwell, who looked at me with a mix of professional annoyance and mild surprise. "Faith," Silas stammered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here?" I didn't give him the satisfaction of an answer. I walked straight to the desk, my eyes locked on the stack of legal documents spread out across the polished wood surface. I had expected divorce papers. I had prepared myself for the sting of being discarded for someone else. But what I saw was 1,000 times more hell-knock, more horrific than I could have imagined. They were the closing documents for my grandmother's old farmhouse in Tennessee. The small piece of land and the creaky, beautiful wooden house she'd left specifically to me when she passed away 3 years ago. She'd put it in my name only, a final gift to ensure I'd always have a roof over my head no matter how hard the world got. It was my safety net. My only inheritance. My one piece of soul left in this world. I looked at the signature line. My name was written there in a perfect flowing script. But I hadn't signed it. Silas had been practicing my signature for months, hadn't he? All those job applications he was supposedly working on at the kitchen table late at night. He wasn't looking for work. He was perfecting a forgery. He was learning how to steal my identity. The sale price was listed in bold black ink. The funds hadn't been moved to our joint account. They had been authorized for transfer to a private account in Bonnie's name. That house was my future. I'd planned to move there one day to get away from the grit of the city and the constant struggle of the Rust Belt. It was the only thing I had left of my family. And he had sold it out from under me like it was a piece of junk sitting in a yard sale. Silas stepped toward me, reaching out to grab my arm, his face twisted into a mask of desperate sincerity. Faith, honey, just listen to me. I did this for us. We were drowning. The collectors were calling every day. I thought if I could just get us clear of the debt, I could explain it later, make it up to you. I recoiled, jerking my arm away as if his touch were a burn. The sight of him, the man I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade, made my stomach churn with pure, unadulterated loathing. He wasn't a man struggling to provide. He was a thief who'd been picking my pockets while I slept. Bonnie stood up from the leather sofa, her face a mask of fake, shivering sympathy. Faith, he had to do it. Silas had some old debts from the track. People were coming to the house when you were at work, threatening him. He didn't want to scare you with the truth. I let out a laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceiling of the office. Old debts? You mean the gambling, Bonnie? Let's call it what it is. He gambled away our rent, and then he decided to gamble away my mother's legacy. I turned my gaze on her and she flinched as if I'd slapped her. And you sat in my kitchen every morning, drinking my tea, acting like my best friend while you helped him dismantle my life. You helped him rob me. Bonnie went silent, her eyes dropping to the floor. She couldn't even look at me. In that moment I realized it wasn't just about the house or the money. It was the murder of every ounce of trust one had ever built. They had treated my life like a resource to be mined until there was nothing left but a hollow shell. I looked at the lawyer. He was watching the drama unfold with a bored expression, like he'd seen this 100 times before in his career. These signatures are forgeries, I said, my voice eerily calm, vibrating with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I did not sign these papers. I did not authorize this sale. And I am calling the police the second I walk out of this room. Silas's face twisted. The guilt vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, ugly sneer. You won't do a damn thing, Faith. Think about it. If I go to jail, who's going to pay the bills? You're a waitress at a greasy spoon. You can't afford the rent on your own. You can't afford the car. You'll be out on the street within a month. You need me to survive. He wasn't trying to apologize anymore. He was trying to lean on my fear. He thought I was the same woman who'd spent years making excuses for his failures. He thought he could keep me trapped in the dark because I was too afraid of the cold outside. But he'd made a fatal mistake. He had pushed me to the point where I had nothing left to lose, and a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. I grabbed my bag and turned toward the door. I'm already on the street, Silas, I said, not bothering to look back at the wreckage of our marriage. I've been on the street for years. The only difference is, now I don't have to carry your weight on my back while I walk. I walked out, my heart thumping a steady rhythmic beat of pure adrenaline. I took the stairs 2 at a time and burst out into the afternoon air. The heat was still oppressive, but for the first time in months I felt a strange, cold clarity. I got into the car and looked at that dented bumper in the rearview mirror. It didn't look like a disaster anymore. It looked like a sign. A signal that the lie had finally cracked wide enough for the light to get in. I sat there for a moment, my hand hovering over the phone. I didn't call the police right away. Instead, I called the one person I knew would actually show up without asking a single question. I called my older brother, Garrett. Garrett was a bridge welder down in Tennessee, a man of few words and a very long memory. I told him everything, the dent, the receipt, the lawyer's office, the forgery. I told him about the house. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that usually preceded a massive storm. Faith, Garrett said, his voice low and steady as a heartbeat. Here's what you're gonna do. You go home. You pack a bag. You get in that car and you drive south to my place. I'll handle Silas. I'll handle the lawyer. That house isn't going anywhere, I promise you that. Nobody steals from this family and walks away clean. Not while I'm breathing. The dent was gone, the house was saved, and Faith was finally, truly home. The rain continued to fall, a rhythmic blessing on the roof of the only place that ever truly belonged to me. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to bed, my footsteps firm on the old wooden floors, confident in the knowledge that tomorrow was mine to right.